Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at PHECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host or the station. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. Have you been adopted? Do you want to adopt? Have you been in foster care? I want you to listen to this podcast about my guest, who is so awesome. But this month is National Adoption Month, and that is what my guest is going to talk about. And it's also National Alzheimer's Month and National Caregivers Month. So I just wanted to say those public service announcements. My guest today is Ashley Rhodes-Courter, who is a licensed social worker. She is a keynote speaker, a New York Times best-selling author. She wrote the book, Sam is My Sister, which I interviewed Ashley about back on June 20th. 3 little words, 3 more words. Ashley is a champion for the Reformation of the foster care system. Ashley speaks internationally on foster care and adoption. Welcome, Ashley, to Chatting with Betsy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You are welcome. It is my pleasure. Your books are so phenomenal. I want everyone to go on Amazon and check them out and buy them. And your story about how you were taken away from your mom, how you went through the foster care system and adopted as a teenager is just phenomenal. So I would love to hear what you have to say.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the introduction. Well, as you just mentioned, I spent almost 10 years in the foster care system. During that time, I had 14 different foster homes. So I lived in group home settings. I lived with traditional foster parents, single parents, and I was born to a single teen mother who was living in foster care herself. So my story was one that really is an example of that cycle of abuse and poverty and neglect that so many generations of families and children get wrapped up in. And I bounced foster home to foster home. Sometimes I was with my brother, sometimes we were separated. And it was a really difficult time in my life, as many of my caregivers were incredibly abusive. So having to go to homes and live with people in places that were supposed to take care of me but weren't was really challenging. But ultimately it was a lot of my childhood experiences that inspired me to become a clinical social worker myself, in the hopes of creating change for other kids who are going through the system. And hopefully, because of stories like mine coming forward and being an advocate and speaking out about these issues, community members will have a better understanding of ways they can contribute and be helpful, but also give hope to those who are in trying circumstances themselves, because they're not alone in these instances, and it's really important to know that there is life after foster care.
And they age out at the age of 18 at a foster care system. Is that correct, Ashley?
Right. So many states are really trying to implement programs and interventions that will help children. So there are some states that will allow children to stay in what is called extended foster care a few more years. And states as well are providing things like college tuition waivers or stipends or different programs that allow for independent living services. But yes, traditionally, when a child turns 18, they age out, which means if they are living in a group home or they have not been adopted, they're completely on their own. And so many of these children become homeless, they're unemployed, they go back to abusive situations, they become teen parents themselves, and they just continue to perpetuate that cycle of abuse, poverty, and neglect for the next generation.
I know there are many horror stories, including your own, about foster care system, and I do hope there are great stories out there also of caring foster parents. So I would like to know, you went through a lot. You were abused. How did you survive that and come out the other side of where you are today? Because you're just so phenomenal in what you're doing. And how did you get that strength to overcome that adversity?
Well, sadly, there are so many kids who are abused in the foster care system who don't survive. Excuse me. Whether they are abused by the hands of foster parents and they pass away as a result of the direct abuse, or later, many years later, as was the case for my own biological brother, who died a few years ago from a drug overdose. So even though we experienced very similar circumstances, our lives and our choices took us in very different directions. And that's a very personal and constant reminder of how important these issues are and why community members should step forward. And I think a lot of my ability to be resilient came in the form of small acts of kindness from those in my community, be it a teacher or a caring foster parent or staff member. I had horrific experiences, but there are incredible foster and adoptive and case management personnel out there. I myself became a foster and adoptive parent. My eldest kiddo was adopted from the foster care system, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the players and people who were instrumental in providing me safety and security and attachment. And so there are a lot of positive things that are out there, but it's also the responsibility of everyone to work together to ensure these less than desirable circumstances aren't happening. And I know your listeners can't see me, but I'm a redhead, so I don't know if I'm just really stubborn and a fighter and just determined to prove everybody wrong, because the bar is set so low for foster kids. We're told that we are losers or that there's something inherently wrong with us and that we're never going to amount to anything. So I think partly I was just really determined to prove everybody wrong.
That's a great attitude to have. They say the best revenge is living your best life, to prove people wrong. And folks, if you want to see Ashley's beautiful red hair, you could go Google Ashley. Fiery red, I think, from the picture. You were adopted at the age of 14, if I remember correctly. What was that experience like? Because at 14, you've already gone through so much. Your trust issues must have been, where you didn't trust anyone, afraid to set roots down because you might get moved again. How did you handle finally getting adopted as a teenager?
Well, luckily, I was actually adopted when I was 12. So was after. Yeah, so I had 4. I know there's so many numbers in relation to my case. So I had 14 caregivers and moved, but I was in foster care for almost 10 years, but I was adopted at 12. So even still, I was a preteen and old enough for the judge to ask if she should sign the papers and make the adoption official at 12 years old. I had a say in the process. And it was exactly what you said, very challenging. That's why my first book is called 3 Little Words, and they're not the words that people would assume. Most people assume the words are, oh, I love you, because they think adoption is a rainbows and sunshine kind of occasion. But adoption can be really scary, and adoption is inherently a loss. And I didn't believe in happily ever after. I had seen kids be unadopted and sent back. That's a thing a lot of people don't know about. You can return children like an outfit that doesn't fit. And so it really wasn't this happily ever after notion for me, because I felt like it was too good to be true, or that something was going to go wrong at any time. And so that was all very terrifying. But when the judge asked me if she should sign the papers and make it official, I shrugged my shoulders and I said, I guess so. So I guess so were my 3 little words, even though they weren't necessarily the words I was supposed to say. But that ultimately became a really poignant thing in our family. And when I was a teenager, I was doing an essay contest to earn a scholarship for college, and it was for the New York Times Magazine. And in the contest, they asked participants to write about a day that was really life-changing, and I wrote about my adoption day and talked about many of the things that I've just shared. So my essay was called 3 Little Words, and I happened to win first place, which was amazing. And so my essay was published in the New York Times Magazine, and from that, publishers contacted me interested in hearing my full story. So it was this really amazing opportunity to share, and for the first time use my story in a way that could really create a lot of change and do good and bring about awareness. And it was really exciting to have the chance to allow for others to be inspired by stories like mine, but mostly be inspired to take action on behalf of kids in their own communities.
I often have said this, Ashley, is that out of tragic circumstances becomes something beautiful, something treasured. And from your bad experiences, you became this resilient, strong advocate who is helping people. And that is just amazing. And I had to thank you for writing these books to help educate people and to help people. People need to know what really goes on with the adoption process, what goes on in the foster care system. This is what bothers me about the foster care system, Ashley. Children who are abused, that bothers me to no end. But aren't there caseworkers who check up on these children, periodically to see if everything's okay?
Well, there are, and I think one of the bigger issues is that every state is run completely differently. So some states have a privatized system, some have state-run systems, and at the end of the day, it's one person. Things fall through the cracks. Caseworkers are incredibly overwhelmed and overworked, and there's huge shortages of foster homes and resources and workers. And, these are not excuses by any means, but, this is how these things happen. And even though foster parents are screened, it takes one person to look the other way or forget something or overlook something by mistake, and that one little mistake could be fatal for a child. So if someone isn't properly doing their job or is falsifying records, then these pretty horrific things happen.
Yes, and that is really unfortunate. Foster care parents, don't they go for training, and aren't they investigated?
Foster parents do go through training, and anyone interested in the foster or adoption process can simply Google their city or state or county and, foster care provider, And every area is going to have free literature and education on how you go through the training classes. And that usually includes a background check and home study and all of these elements. But again, sometimes things get missed, and sometimes some groups are just so desperate to have qualified families because there is such a shortage. Other times there are policies in place in certain states that prevent different types of people from being foster parents or adoptive parents. There's still discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community in the states, despite the number of waiting children. In some states, you can't be a single person and adopt. So, depending on your state's rules, there are a variety of barriers in play, but there are also opportunities to become involved in programs such as the Guardian Ad Litem program or CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate. That's another program that has training that you go through and a background check and gives you an opportunity to be a voice for a child in the court system, which is a really powerful way to make a difference. So each area will have their own requirements for training. And I think it's also really important for prospective parents to be very clear about what their intentions are. No one should go into foster care with the sole intention of adoption. If that is the case, then your heart will be broken many, many times over, because foster care is not meant to be a vehicle for adoption. The whole point of foster care is to provide temporary housing and care for children until their families of origin are able to successfully parent them and care for them. So people sometimes will think that they will become foster parents because they want to adopt, but if that's the case, then your heart will be broken many, many times over, because the whole point is to help these kiddos get home. However, there are adoptions that do happen from fostering. Our eldest was adopted from the foster care system after they had been in our home for many years. And so these things do happen. But a big, important key is to ask lots of questions, become super involved in any programs or clubs or offerings that your local agencies have. But most of these agencies also are nonprofit organizations or groups that desperately need help with things like fundraisers or community outreach or donations for the children and families themselves. So there's really always a way to become involved in some capacity, no matter what abilities or time, or the adage that time, talent, or treasure. There's always a way to give back.
And I have to ask you this question, Ashley, maybe not when you were growing up, because things do change, but do they, in the foster care system, do the families get mental health counseling or family counseling?
Well, do you mean the foster families or the biological families?
Both. To to adjust to a foster child in a home, or for the foster child to get counseling if he or she needs it.
I think counseling is really strongly encouraged, though I don't think it's mandated for most foster parents. However, I think it's a really, really good idea and needs to be done. And the case plans for the children or the birth parents might vary. Mental health or counseling might be a part of the program, and if it is, then it would be required. But other times, children are put into foster care situations, and it's not necessarily required. As a licensed clinical social worker and mental health provider myself now, I highly encourage everyone to have that kind of extra support. And what's been sort of a blessing in the age of COVID is that now there are more telehealth providers than ever before. So access to quality mental health care and support isn't quite as difficult as it was prior to COVID, because now you can see providers who were licensed all over your state, not just the region where you live.
Actually, I have to ask you this concerning COVID. Is there an increase in the amount of foster care children due to the pandemic more than normal?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question because one unexpected result that I certainly did not anticipate are the number of children entering the foster care system who previously had been either adopted or were informally living with relatives in kinship care. So sadly, I have seen, even on my caseload, an increase in children who are back in the foster care system because their elder caregivers died of COVID, and they were the sole providers and healthy family members to care for the kids. So COVID definitely has had an impact on the child welfare system, and particularly with kinship families, tragically.
Well,
but also the older foster parents who were perhaps a little more vulnerable, maybe they've had to close their foster homes. So we had more kids entering the foster care system because of family fatalities, and certainly a shortage of foster homes because of the nervousness and uncertainty and vulnerability of some of the foster carers themselves.
That was going to be my question I was going to ask you, but you already answered that about finding foster care homes during the time of COVID, because a lot of people may not want a stranger in their home because of risk.
Well, yeah, you're right. And child welfare agencies across the country had to have a whole new set. How do you do visits safely? Do you visit even just regular monthly visits in your home, but then the visits with birth families or going out into the community? It was an incredibly stressful time for the foster care and child welfare community. Absolutely.
And then you have the caseworkers who I have read, are unable to visit the homes. And I did read that child abuse, even in regular, biological homes, abuse was up for many children.
For our agency, we saw a dramatic increase in behavioral needs, in school readiness decreased significantly. There have been many more instances of child abuse and neglect. With these stressful situations and times, you're definitely going to see some unfortunate results in the mental health world and child welfare arenas.
That is just heartbreaking to me to hear that, but I have interviewed many mental health professionals, and the amount of children and teenagers and even all ages seeking mental health is at an all-time high, and there's a shortage of mental health workers because now, mental health is seeking mental health is getting more acceptable, which it should have always been acceptable, but it wasn't. But now it's getting to be that way, and I'm glad about that. Sorry it took the pandemic to do that, but I'm glad to hear public service announcements about seeking mental health. What would you suggest for someone to do if they were interested in being a foster care parent?
If someone is interested in learning more about foster care and adoption, I would again start with just Googling foster care or foster care provider and your city, county, state, as well as explore your local CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate Group, because being a foster parent is a really big commitment, and some people may not have the sense that they have the space or the time to fully commit to something like fostering a child, but they might feel like they still want to help foster children and be a voice. So CASA is a great organization to be a part of, and there's one in almost every state and every area, very accessible. Or you can also consider becoming a respite foster parent, which is someone who goes through the foster parenting classes and trainings, but only provides, quick 1 or 2 nights either relief for existing foster parents, or maybe you'll get a kiddo that will stay with you for a night or two until a placement is identified for them. So all of those are really helpful ways to be a part of the system, regardless of the amount of time or energy or space that you have to give.
How do you spell the name of the first organization you mentioned?
CASA, C-A-S-A, Court-Appointed Special Advocates.
Okay.
And here in Florida, they're called Guardian Ad Litem. So I live in Florida, and so where I'm from, they're called Guardian Ad Litem. But in most places in the country, the program is CASA, C-A-S-A, Court-Appointed Special Advocates.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to make sure I get this information correct for the blog. And what would you like to see being reformed in the foster care system, Ashley?
I think one of the big reforms should certainly be access to quality mental health care and access to services and support for birth families, foster families, youth. Having some kind of consistency with that care would do a world of good. And I think we need to be investing in preventative strategies that will help limit the number of children coming into the foster care system by supporting programs that help keep families together, but also invest in family finding techniques that allow for providers to identify quality and healthy relatives for these children within their own communities or within their own families. I think that would help lessen the burden on the foster care system. But at the same time, we need to constantly be recruiting and retaining quality foster homes for youth in the event that family is not an option for whatever reason.
Those are great ideas. And would you want to reform the adoption process, since it's National Adoption Month, and what they go through to adopt a child?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because there's so many different forms of adoption. Sometimes you are adopting a child from foster care at the age of 12, like was my situation. Some people go through private adoptions, and children are adopted in infancy. There are domestic adoptions. There are international adoptions. And so adoption really is not a one-size-fits-all kind of endeavor. And the results of adoption are very different. I'm an adoptee that feels very whole and grateful and thrilled by the notion of adoption, but there are many in the adoption community who don't feel that way, and they feel very sad and turned off by adoption. There are many birth mothers who have placed children for adoption and are very grateful and have positive relationships with the adoptive parents. Other times those relationships are more strained, and birth mothers aren't given support for their loss and grief and the process. So there's no one right answer other than to continue to share stories and create support networks and raise awareness and make sure that all players in the adoption process have access to the tools and resources they're going to need to navigate adoption for the rest of their lives, because adoption doesn't go away once the papers are finalized. There are new issues that come about for a lifetime. And so having that constant information is really useful to help navigate all of the circumstances that pop up as we age, no matter when we were adopted or no matter what way adoption has touched our lives or families.
Well, that's a good answer. Yes, adoption, there are many various adoptions. I have heard of instances where people have adopted children from overseas. They didn't know that they had developmental problems. I've heard of stories where a biological parent comes back and wants their child back. There are so many different stories and circumstances, which is true. I am glad to know that maybe it's not in every state, but that the adoption records are open to find out family history. I always felt, if somebody was adopted, they don't know their biological history of
it's my understanding in most states that adoption records are sealed. So when I was adopted, my records were sealed, and the only reason I ultimately got access to my records was because I was later involved in a series of class action lawsuits because of how egregious the abuse I had suffered in foster care was. So it's actually really important that before a family finalizes an adoption, that they seek and get access to as much information as possible prior to the adoption. And a lot of that will hopefully come from working with a quality agency, whether it's a foster care agency or a private adoption agency, to really do that due diligence before the adoption finalizes to make sure that you have all of the information that you might need moving forward.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much, Ashley, for coming on Chatting with Betsy and talking about the foster care system and what you've been through and giving your great advice. Where can people purchase your books? Is it just Amazon.com or is there somewhere else?
Oh, no. So my books, 3 Little Words and 3 More Words, are available wherever your favorite books are. Of course, I always encourage people to support their local independent bookstores, but they're available online or and wherever you like to buy your books. And I also would love to give a little plug for the month of November. I am up for a national award with L'Oreal Paris USA, and I have been chosen as one of 10 women of worth for our work in the nonprofit arena. And for the whole month of November, at womenofworth.com, voters can go once a day and vote for their favorite candidate, and the winning candidate gets an additional $25,000 grant from L'Oreal Paris. So I'm really excited about this ongoing competition. So please feel free to go online and vote for Ashley Rhodes-Courter as this year's L'Oreal National Women of Worth winner.
Congratulations on that, Ashley. And I know, folks, that I did vote, and I will be voting every day for Ashley, and I hope you win so that you can use that money. Hope you win. And how can people get in touch with you, Ashley, if they wanted to connect with you?
Well, I'm available on social media, and my website is Rhodes-Courter.com, and I'm Ashley Rhodes-Courter.
Ashley Rhodes-Courter. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, and good luck to you with the contest. Folks, please check out Ashley's books because they are just phenomenal, riveting. And check out the show that Ashley was on June 20th, about the book is Sam is My Sister, about her child who is transgender. Very interesting book. It was a great interview. And I asked Ashley to come back to talk about the foster care system and her experience today. So thank you for coming back, Ashley. Folks, if you missed any of this podcast, you could catch it all over again on your favorite podcast outlet. I am on Speaker, Spotify, Amazon Music, just to name a few. Please share this podcast to help other people. We never know what people have experienced in their life. Maybe you know someone who's interested in being a foster care parent or in adopting. So please share this podcast to help others. And please read the blog, which will have information. Thank you to Jeannie White, who's station manager at Passionate World Talk Radio Network, who produces the show, writes the blog. And thank you to Lillian Caldwell, CEO at Passionate World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible for people to have a voice and to have a platform to speak. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. Folks, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and reach out. If you know someone who is being adopted at any time, honor that child. Honor the parents. If you know a caregiver, please reach out to them. It's so important. A text, something. And yes, I'm passionate about that because I was a caregiver and I still am. Just a different type of caregiver now. And National Alzheimer's Month, please educate yourself on this disease. No one is immune. Nobody. There's no cure. There's no treatment. Please educate yourself. And if you think you are having memory problems, you're concerned, please consult your healthcare provider about it. And also, mental health. I'm a mental health advocate. You all know that. If you are having difficulty, please seek professional help. Talk to your healthcare provider about resources. And I just want to thank everybody for listening to this show. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy, a passionate World Talk Radio Network. Bye-bye, everybody.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at PHECONNECTSHOW@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the internet.